Hello dear students. Let's start with a new chapter in our English reader. That is Unit 7, A Visit to Cambridge. Now in this story, we will read about two differently abled or disabled person, that is Stephen Hawkins and Firdaus Kanda. So they are two persons, how their life is connected to each other, how they are, what were the problems that they became differently abled or disabled, we will going to study in this chapter. So as I read the chapter, I will be explaining you. Start reading the chapter. Before you read, this is a story of a meeting between two extraordinary people, both of them disabled or differently abled. So those handicapped person or paralytic, we don't call them, basically handicapped person, we don't call them handicapped or disabled. There's a beautiful word used for them, that is differently abled. So Stephen Hawkins is one of the greatest scientists of all times. He suffers from a form of paralysis that confines him to a wheelchair and allows him to speak only by punching buttons on a computer, which speaks for him in a machine-like voice. So because of his paralytic condition, he couldn't move his body. And because of that, he only could use his fingers. So he used to punch buttons on a wheelchair, which prompted on a computer, and there is a voice that comes from a computer. This is a disease that he got at a very young age when he was in college. And it spread, it was not a sudden thing, it was a neural disorder, and it spreads from his legs towards his body, leaving his brain active. He was a great scientist. Now, Firdaus Kanga is a writer and journalist who lives and works in Mumbai. Kanga was born with brittle bones that tended to break easily when he was a child. Like Hawkins, Kanga moves around in a wheelchair. Two great men exchange thoughts on what it means to live life in a wheelchair and how the so-called normal people react to the disabled. So here we are going to read about two great personalities, a journalist, a scientist, how they interacted among each other, what are their thoughts of being on the wheelchair, how people react to them being on a wheelchair, how are their reaction when they see people, so disabled people. So let us start with the chapter. Cambridge was my metaphor for England. A metaphor is something that you compare it with. So when he says Cambridge, it means England. As it was strange that when I left, it had become altogether something else, because I had met Stephen Hawkins there. It was on a walking tour to Cambridge that my guide mentioned Stephen Hawkins, poor man who is quite disabled now, though he is a worthy successor to Isaac Newton, whose chair he has at the university. So you can see here itself, you can see how a normal person reacts to a disabled person or person who's on a wheelchair. So here you can see he says that poor man. Stephen Hawkins itself was a great scientist with exceptional qualities. He was into finding the black hole and such a great physicist. And because of that, his qualities, he being such a great scientist, he is being the successor of Isaac Newton in the university, the chair he was sitting in. Still, he is looked upon into as a poor man. Because why? Because he is on a wheelchair. And I started because I had quite forgotten forgotten that this most brilliant and completely paralyzed astrophysicist, the author of A Brief History of Time, one of the biggest bestseller ever, lived here. Yes, there is another story. There is a movie actually made on him. How he was in college and what was his life, and then how he was paralyzed and how he dealt with all these disabilities and came up with so many great ideas and being such a great astrophysicist. There is a movie, or the movie name is The Story of Everything. So you should go and watch that movie too. It will give you the whole life of Stephen Hawkins. When the walking tour was done, I rushed to a phone booth and, almost tearing the cords so it could reach me outside, phoned Stephen Hawkins' house. There was his assistant on the line, and I told him I had come in a wheelchair from India. Perhaps he thought I had propelled myself all the way to write about my travels in Britain. So here actually the one who picked up the phone is assistant. When he said that I am in a wheelchair, it was taken as a joke for him. Like the assistant never really thought the one who's calling is on a wheelchair. I had to see Professor Hawkins. Even 10 minutes would do. Half an hour, he said. From 3:30 to 4. So he thought that he would just get 10 minutes, but to his surprise, he got almost half an hour to have a conversation with the great scientist Stephen Hawkins. And suddenly, I felt weak all over. Growing up disabled, you get fed up with people asking you to be brave, as if you have a courage account on which you are too lazy to draw a check. So here he's comparing it with drawing a check from an account, as if you have a lot of money. You can, whenever you want, you can draw. So here people always feel bad, and they look down to disabled people, and they always tell them, oh, it's okay, everything will be fine, as if they are too lazy to show courage, whereas they are disabled and they actually cannot do things. Then you know how much is possible. The only thing that makes you stronger is seeing somebody like you achieving something huge. Yes, he saw Stephen Hawkins being on a wheelchair, couldn't move his body, only his finger works, and he has achieved so much in life. What a big name he has achieved in his life. So he is kind of an inspiration for Firdaus. Then you know how much is possible for you to reach out further than you ever thought you could. I haven't been brave, said his disembodied computer voice. The next afternoon, I had no choice. Surely, I want to say, living creatively with the reality of his disintegrating body was a choice. Yes, Stephen Hawkins knew that his body is disintegrating. Lower means it's breaking down time, and he will finally be dead. He finally will not be able to do that much also. But that was his choice of using his brain and using its ability to a limit. That was actually limitless. But I kept quiet because I felt guilty every time I spoke to him, forcing him to respond. Yes, because if somebody speaks to him, his whole body was not working. His only fingers were working. So every time he has to answer someone, he has to move his finger on the button on his wheelchair, and that itself was, for a person who's looking at him, is so discouraging, maybe, because he was forced, or he was working too hard to even answer. There he was, tapping at the little switch in his hand, trying to find the words on his computer with the only bit of movement left to him, his long, pale fingers. Every so often, his eyes would shut in frustration, exhaustion, and sitting opposite him, I could feel his anguish. Yes, because it is all tiring if somebody is telling you want to speak and you're just typing with your fingers slowly. So it creates a lot of frustration. Not only the person who's doing it, the person in front of you feels it, that he is so exhausted doing it, or he's so frustrated doing it. So ever so often his eyes would shut in frustration and exhaustion. And sitting opposite to him, I could feel his anguish. That means the pain, what Stephen Hawkins was feeling at that time, being so, miserable and so handicapped that he couldn't even speak, he couldn't even type, and in frustration he used to close his eyes again and again. It means he's forcing himself, he's pushing it too hard. And the person in front of him, Firdaus, could feel that pain, that frustration. The mind buoyant with thoughts. That means his mind was active, intensely active and vibrant, with a lot of thoughts, with bright ideas. But that came out in frozen phrases and sentences, stiff as a corpse. That means his mind was ever active and full of thoughts, full of new ideas, but his body didn't react it. It was as if it was a corpse, without any emotions, without any feelings, without any movement. A lot of people seem to think that disabled people are chronically happy. I said, I know that's not true myself. Are you often laughing inside? So people often feel that they are a lot of people seem that they think that disabled people are chronically happy, and I know that it is not true. People may think that they are happy with the way they are, but actually it is not so. Actually, he asked Stephen Hawkins that, are you often laughing inside? He said. So after 3 minutes later he responded, I find it amusing when people patronize me. Okay, and then he feels, he amused that I am like a dead corpse, I am differently abled, I cannot, but still people adore me, people patronize me, want to be like me. And that is really, something good. And something good in one sense, and the other sense that he is something like, he's like this, like a corpse, like a disabled person, and still people are patronizing, wanted to follow me, adore me, admire me. And do you find it annoying when people like me comes and disturbs you in your work? The answer flashed, yes. Then he smiled his one-way smile, and I knew, without being sentimental or silly, that I was looking at one of the most beautiful men in the world. So he asked he asked Stephen Hawkins that, in all these, in this situation, in such a, being such a great scientist, do you think I am coming and disturbing you? So he gave that one wing smile that he always gave, and that was a very catchy smile that he used to give, and that made Firdaus, admire him, and he found Stephen Hawkins the most beautiful man in the world. A glimpse of him is shocking because he is like a still photograph, as if all those pictures of him in magazine and newspaper have turned three-dimensional. So, like, a glimpse of him is shocking because he's like a still photograph. He doesn't move. He is still. Only his finger moves on a button and his body is still. It doesn't move. And all those pictures of him in the magazine and newspaper have turned three-dimensional. It looks so. Then you see the head twist sideways into a slump, the torso shrunk inside the pale blue shirt, the wasted legs. You look at his eyes, which can speak still, and they are saying something huge and urgent. It is hard to tell what, but you are shaken because you have seen something you never thought could be seen. Yes, he described him on a wheelchair. Firdaus described Stephen Hawkins on a wheelchair. His head was twisted to one side with a slump, and his torso, the upper part of the body, was shrunk in the chair with the blue shirt that he was wearing. And his legs, wasted leg, that means legs were all twisted and of no use. You look into her eyes were bright. He had so many things in his eyes, that means it could speak. And still they were saying, and they are saying something huge and urgent. It is hard to tell what, but you are shaken because you have seen something that you had never thought. He had never thought he would meet Stephen Hawkins, and when he saw him, he could describe him that he had lots of questions and a lot of answers in his eyes that wanted to speak, but it was, as his condition was, he could only type from his fingers and could not speak.